When my parents spent $230,000 on my sister's wedding, I smiled and congratulated them. I even baked the cupcakes, 200 of them, and stayed up all night to make sure each swirl of frosting looked perfect. I told myself that was love, that family meant showing up even when you're exhausted and broke. But when my son needed $85,000 to stay alive, they said they couldn't help me because they were tapped out. Those were my mother's exact words. Tapped out. I remember sitting outside the hospital room, the smell of disinfectant clinging to my clothes, the sound of the monitor beeping in a slow rhythm that felt like a countdown. Jack was asleep, a tangle of wires and tubes, his little chest rising and falling like he was fighting to stay tethered to this world. I held my phone, staring at my parents' last message. "We wish we could, honey, but we just can't right now. You'll figure something out. You always do." I didn't cry right away. I felt empty, like all the air had been sucked out of the hallway. A nurse walked past and gave me a sympathetic smile, the kind people give when they know your story without needing to ask. I smiled back because that's what I've always done: smile, pretend everything's fine, and keep moving. When my parents hosted Brooke's wedding last year, they rented out an entire vineyard. There were chandeliers in the trees, a string quartet, a champagne fountain. I remember Dad bragging to guests about how it was worth every penny to give Brooke the day she deserved. I thought about that as I sat in a plastic hospital chair, wondering what my son deserved. Apparently not a chance to live. I called my mom again, one last time. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "It's his life we're talking about." There was silence, then her sigh, the same sigh she'd used when I forgot to send birthday cards as a teenager. "Callie, your father and I have done enough. We can't just throw money at every problem. Maybe look into fundraising." She said it like she was giving me good advice, like asking strangers for help was the same as asking your own parents. After the call, I went into Jack's room and sat beside his bed. His hand was small and pale in mine, and I whispered stories about when he was a baby, about the time he smeared cookie dough all over the kitchen and said it was art. His lips curved faintly, just enough to break me. I pressed my forehead against his and made a silent promise. I would find the money somehow, even if I had to sell every piece of myself to do it. That was the night I stopped being their daughter and became Jack's only hope. Brooke was always the one everyone talked about. Even when we were kids, my parents treated her like she was made of gold. She was the pretty one, the smart one, the one with all the opportunities. Mom would drive her to private school every morning while I took the city bus to the public one across town. Brooke had piano lessons, art classes, and trips to summer camp in California. I worked part-time at a diner, saving tips just to pay for books at community college. No one ever said it out loud, but it was clear. Brooke was the dream, and I was the reminder of how life could go wrong. Dad used to brag about her test scores at family dinners. "Brooke's going to make something of herself," he'd say, patting her shoulder like she was a prize. When he looked at me, he'd ask, "Still baking, huh?" As if my job was a hobby that had gone on too long. I told myself I didn't care. I liked working with my hands. I liked creating something people could enjoy. But deep down, I wanted him to see that I was trying too. When Brooke got engaged to Owen, the excitement in our house could have powered the whole city. Mom started planning the wedding before the ring was even sized. "It has to be perfect," she kept saying. "Our friends will be there." That phrase, "our friends," always meant the people they wanted to impress, not the ones who actually cared. They picked a vineyard outside Portland, hired a designer from New York, and booked a live band that charged more per hour than I made in a month. I offered to bake the desserts. I thought it would be a way to be part of things, to contribute. Mom smiled and said, "That's so thoughtful, sweetie. It'll save us a little money." She said it like she was doing me a favor. I spent 3 nights straight baking, pies, cupcakes, cookies, a wedding cake taller than Brooke herself. On the wedding day, I stood in the back of the tent, watching her twirl under the fairy lights while my parents beamed. People clapped and cried. No one noticed me wiping flour from my dress. After the wedding, Brooke and Owen went on a 5-star honeymoon in Greece. My parents couldn't stop talking about it. They deserve it, Mom said one night over the phone. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I thought about the bills piling up at my bakery and the small apartment where Jack slept beside me because I couldn't afford another room. But I didn't say anything. Months later, when Jack got sick, I called Brooke first, hoping maybe she'd understand. She listened, then said, "You can't expect Mom and Dad to fix everything for you, Callie. You made your choices." Her tone was sharp, not cruel exactly, but cold. The way she spoke when she thought she was being mature. That was the moment I realized we weren't really sisters anymore. We'd grown up in the same house, but we lived in completely different worlds. Hers was built on money and approval. Mine was built on effort and silence. I hung up and looked at my reflection in the bakery window that night. Tired eyes, flour on my hands, a single mom holding everything together. Brooke had her perfect life. I just had what was real. I started selling everything I could. The mixer I'd saved months for, the espresso machine customers loved, even the display shelves I'd built myself. Each sale hurt, but I told myself it didn't matter as long as Jack could get his treatment. I ran special offers at the bakery, lowered prices, and stayed open late hoping for more sales. I slept in the back room most nights, using a folded apron as a pillow. The smell of sugar and yeast clung to my clothes, and my hands were always raw from scrubbing pans, but I didn't stop. Every dollar felt like one small step toward saving him. When I finally counted what I'd made, it wasn't enough. Not even close. I sat at my work table surrounded by empty boxes and receipts, trying to think of anything else to sell. My jewelry box sat on the counter. I opened it and stared at the tiny gold bracelet my mom gave me for graduation. I'd kept it all these years, thinking it meant she was proud of me. I took it to a pawn shop the next morning. The man behind the counter offered less than I hoped for, but I didn't argue. I just took the cash and thanked him. That afternoon, I decided to visit my parents again. Maybe if they saw how desperate things had become, they'd help. When I walked into their house, it smelled like new furniture and lemon polish. Mom was at the kitchen table scrolling through her tablet. Brooke was beside her, flipping through a fashion magazine. I could see the designer logo on her dress before she even looked up. "Mom," I said quietly, "I really need your help. I've sold everything. Jack's doctor said we're running out of time." Mom didn't even look up right away. She sighed and set her tablet down. "Callie, we can't keep doing this. We're not a bank." Her words hit harder than I expected. Brooke crossed her legs and said, "Maybe if you'd been smarter with your choices, you wouldn't be in this position." She smiled a little, like she thought she was being reasonable. I wanted to yell, to remind them I'd worked every day since I was 16. But all I managed to say was, "He's just a child. Your grandson." Mom shook her head and said, "We've helped enough. You'll figure something out." That was the end of the conversation. I stood there for a second, then walked out without another word. That night, back at the hospital, Jack was awake. The machines hummed softly, casting a faint blue light across his face. He looked at me and asked, "Mom, am I in trouble because I'm sick?" My throat closed. I sat on the edge of his bed and brushed his hair back. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong." I smiled until he closed his eyes, but as soon as he fell asleep, I turned away and cried quietly so he wouldn't hear me. I felt completely alone that night, but I made myself a promise. No matter how much it cost, I'd find a way. I wouldn't let him see me give up. The doctors said Jack's lungs were getting weaker. His breathing was shallow, and each day the machines seemed to do more of the work for him. I sat beside his bed, watching his small chest rise and fall under the thin blanket. Every beep from the monitor made my stomach twist. I tried to stay calm for him, but inside I was falling apart. The hospital lights never dimmed, and the constant smell of disinfectant made it hard to feel human anymore. One afternoon, while I was waiting for an update from the nurse, my dad showed up. He didn't call first or even ask if it was a good time. He just walked in wearing his usual pressed shirt, like he was on his way to a meeting. For a second, I thought maybe he'd changed his mind, maybe he'd come to help. But then he spoke. "Callie," he said, standing by the doorway, "you should have planned better. Things like this don't happen out of nowhere." His tone was calm, almost detached, like we were talking about a broken car, not a sick child. I told him I had insurance, but it didn't cover everything. He nodded slowly, scrolling through his phone. "You should have had better coverage. You made your bed, now you have to lie in it." The words hit me like a slap. I stared at him, wondering how someone could stand a few feet away from his dying grandson and talk about responsibility. Jack coughed suddenly, gasping for air, and I jumped up to help him sit upright. My dad didn't move. He just looked uncomfortable, like the noise was an inconvenience. The nurse came in, checked the monitors, and adjusted the tubes. When she left, my dad cleared his throat and said, "You can't keep blaming everyone else for your choices, Callie. Life's hard for everyone." I wanted to scream. Instead, I said quietly, "He's 9 years old. What choices did he make?" My father didn't answer. He slipped his phone into his pocket and said, "I have to get going. Keep me updated." Then he walked out without even looking at Jack. I stood there frozen, staring at the door long after he left. My heart felt heavy but cold at the same time. Something inside me changed in that moment. I realized that no matter what I did, I'd never get their help or understanding. I wasn't their daughter anymore, not in the way Brooke was. That night, I sat by the window in the hospital corridor. The city lights flickered in the distance. My reflection looked older, worn out, but focused. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to make them proud, trying to prove I was worth something. None of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was Jack. I went back to his room, took his hand, and whispered that I loved him. He was half asleep, breathing softly, unaware of how much I needed that small sound. I didn't cry this time. I just made a quiet promise to myself. I would never ask them for help again. Whatever happened next, I'd face it alone. Weeks passed and the bills kept growing. I had stopped checking my email because every message seemed to bring new numbers, new amounts I couldn't pay. Then one morning, while I sat in the hospital cafeteria with a cup of cold coffee, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Emily from a local charity foundation. She said someone had told her about Jack, maybe a nurse, maybe a customer from my bakery. She never said who. Emily explained that the foundation sometimes helped families with medical expenses. I thought she was being kind, but I didn't expect much. Still, I filled out the form she handed me, not daring to hope. 2 days later, she called again. Her voice was bright, almost excited. "We're covering most of the cost," she said. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "Yes," she said. "You won't have to worry about the hospital bill anymore. Focus on your son." When I hung up, I pressed my hand over my mouth and finally let myself cry. Not quiet tears this time, real, shaking sobs that felt like years of pain pouring out at once. For the first time, someone who didn't even know us had cared enough to help. It wasn't family, not blood, but it was kindness that felt pure. The doctors scheduled Jack's surgery that same week. I sat outside the operating room, hands clasped so tight they hurt. Hours went by, but time didn't feel real. When the door finally opened and the surgeon smiled, I knew before he spoke. "It went well," he said. "He's going to be okay." My knees nearly gave out. I wanted to thank everyone in that hallway. The nurses, the charity, even the janitor walking past. When they brought Jack to recovery, his face looked peaceful for the first time in months. I held his hand and whispered, "We did it, baby." He opened his eyes just long enough to give me a sleepy smile. That moment felt like sunlight after a long winter. I waited for my parents to show up, but they never did. Not a single call, not even a message asking about him. Days turned into a week, and the silence stayed. I tried not to let it bother me. Gratitude and anger fought inside me every minute. I owed everything to strangers, while the people who were supposed to love me most acted like nothing happened. A week later, my phone buzzed with a text from Brooke. For a second, I thought maybe she was checking on Jack. Instead, the message read, "Glad Jack's okay. Guess what? I'm pregnant. Mom's throwing us a baby shower. I stared at the screen for a long time. The words blurred a little, but I didn't cry. I just smiled, a small, tired smile that didn't reach my eyes. Perfect, I said quietly to myself. They'd moved on, like nothing had happened, like my son's fight for his life was just another small drama in their busy world. That night, as Jack slept beside me, I realized I didn't need them anymore. The love I'd been begging for was never real. What saved my son came from the goodness of strangers, and from the strength I didn't know I had. Time slowly started to feel normal again. Jack was getting stronger every day. He could walk short distances and even help me in the bakery by sprinkling sugar on cookies. The sound of his laughter filled the small shop, and that alone kept me going. The bakery had taken a hit during his illness, but I worked hard to bring it back to life. I painted the walls, rearranged the shelves, and introduced new items. Customers returned, one by one, and soon I was back to baking full days. It wasn't perfect, but it was steady, and it was mine. I didn't think about my parents much anymore. Their silence had become familiar, like a noise you stop noticing after a while. I focused on Jack, on keeping the business running, and on the peace that came from not expecting anything from anyone. Life was simple, quiet, and almost peaceful. Then one morning, just after opening, the bell above the door rang. When I looked up, I saw Owen, my brother-in-law. He stood there in a wrinkled shirt and looked tired, like he hadn't slept well in days. I hadn't seen him since the wedding. For a moment, I wondered why he was here. "Hey, Callie," he said softly. "Mind if I grab a coffee?" "Of course," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "Take a seat. I'll bring it over." He sat by the window, staring out at the street. When I placed his cup down, he smiled faintly but didn't say much. Over the next few weeks, he started stopping by more often. First for coffee, then for lunch, sometimes just to talk. I didn't ask many questions, but it was clear something was wrong. One morning, while the shop was quiet, he sighed and said, "Brooke's been spending like crazy. Credit cards maxed out. Your parents keep helping, but it's never enough." His voice was low, embarrassed almost. "She always wants more, bigger things, nicer things. And when I say no, she loses it." I listened, not sure what to say. It was strange hearing him speak like that, especially about Brooke. She had always acted like everything in her life was flawless. But Owen's tired eyes told another story. He kept coming, talking a little more each time. He told me about the fights, about the late-night arguments over money, and how he felt trapped. "Your mom keeps telling her she deserves the best," he said once, shaking his head. "But I can't keep up. I'm drowning." I didn't interrupt him. I just nodded, serving coffee or a slice of pie while he talked. Inside, though, something shifted. For years, I'd believed Brooke's life was untouchable. Perfect husband, perfect parents, perfect future. But now I was seeing the truth. Cracks were forming in the world they'd built. I didn't feel joy hearing it, but I did feel something close to relief. Maybe fairness or balance. They had treated me like the failure, but now their perfect image was starting to crumble. When Owen left that day, he thanked me for listening. I watched him walk down the street, shoulders slumped, and I realized I finally had something I'd never had before, power. Not the cruel kind, but the kind that comes from knowing the truth. And for the first time, I started to understand how I could use it. Owen came by the bakery almost every morning now. He'd started sitting at the same table near the window, always ordering plain coffee and a muffin, but barely touching either. He looked thinner, his eyes darker, like he carried too much weight that no one could see. We spoke more often, not about family, but about ordinary things, work, customers, the weather. Still, there were moments when the mask slipped, and I could tell something inside him was breaking. One slow afternoon, he finally spoke the truth. "I'm in serious debt," he said quietly, staring at his cup. "Brooke spends faster than I can earn. Your parents think I should just work harder, but I'm already doing everything I can." His voice trembled a little. "She doesn't listen. Every week it's something new, clothes, parties, furniture she doesn't even need. I can't keep up." I didn't interrupt him. I just listened. There was a sadness in his words that I recognized. the same exhaustion I'd carried for years. "I know what it's like," I said softly. "To give and still be told it's not enough." He nodded but didn't look up. For a moment, we sat in silence, both lost in our thoughts. When he left, I realized how fragile their perfect life had become. A few days later, I went to a small cafe across town to meet a supplier. While I waited for him, I heard a familiar voice from the next table. It was my mother. I froze. She was sitting with two women I didn't know, sipping tea and talking loudly. I told myself not to listen, but then I heard my name. "She made such a scene at the hospital," my mother said, her tone sharp. "Always the victim. Using that poor boy's illness to get attention. It's pathetic." The words cut deep, sharper than I expected. My chest tightened. I turned slightly and saw her shake her head, pretending to be tired of me, like I was some burden she had to carry. The women nodded along, whispering fake sympathy. I felt heat rise in my face, but I didn't move. My phone was in my hand, and without thinking, I pressed record. Her voice continued, calm and cruel. "She just wants people to feel sorry for her. Brooke never caused us that kind of stress. Callie's always been dramatic." The recording lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough. Enough to remind me who they really were. I left the cafe before she could see me. My hands shook as I walked down the street, but I felt strangely clear. That night, I sat in my bakery after closing, listening to the recording again. Her voice sounded colder each time. I thought about how much I had begged them, how small I had felt. Not anymore. I wasn't going to post it online or make a public scene. That wasn't my style. But I knew one thing. They had built their lives on lies, and now I had the truth. Over the next few weeks, I kept collecting small pieces, things Owen said, things I overheard, bits of proof that showed who they really were. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I wouldn't stay silent. For years, they'd made me feel powerless. Now the cracks in their world were widening, and I was finally ready to watch it fall apart. It took months before I finally decided what to do. I didn't want revenge at first. I just wanted peace. But the more I thought about everything they'd said, the more I realized peace would never come until the truth was out. I wanted them to hear their own words, to face what they'd done. Not in anger, but in clarity. So I planned a dinner. I called my mother one afternoon and said I wanted to start over. She sounded surprised but pleased. "That's wonderful, Callie," she said quickly. "Let's all sit down and move past this nonsense." I agreed and suggested my place. I spent 2 days cleaning the bakery's small dining area and turning it into something warm and welcoming. I brought out my best dishes, polished the silverware, and lit candles along the table. I even made Brooke's favorite lemon pie, the same one I'd baked for her wedding. When they arrived, I greeted them with a calm smile. Brooke came in wearing an expensive dress, holding her phone like a trophy. My parents followed, all smiles, acting like nothing had ever happened. Owen walked behind them, quieter than usual, his face pale. He nodded to me politely but said nothing. Dinner started gently. We talked about small things, work, the bakery, the weather. Brooke bragged about her pregnancy. My mom praised her like she'd invented motherhood, and my dad nodded proudly. I just listened, letting them talk. The air was heavy with fake comfort, like everyone was pretending this was normal. When the plates were cleared, I stood up and said, "I have something I want to share." My voice was steady. They all looked at me, curious. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Then I pressed play. The room filled with my mother's voice from the cafe. Every cruel word echoed off the walls. The things she'd said about me, about Jack, about how I used his illness for attention. Brooke's smirk faded. My father froze. No one spoke. Then came another recording, Brooke's own laughter from a conversation she'd had with Mom, mocking me for asking for help. For a long time, no one moved. The only sound was the soft hum of the bakery's fridge in the background. Owen's face turned pale as he listened. Brooke stammered, trying to explain. "That was just, I didn't mean." She looked at Owen, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. My father's face was red. My mother stared at the table, silent. When the recording ended, I said quietly, You wouldn't spend $85,000 to save your grandson's life, but you spent $230,000 to prove you were good parents. That's who you are. No one answered. The silence was heavy and uncomfortable. Brooke's hands trembled slightly as she pushed her plate away. My father tried to speak but couldn't. My mother still wouldn't look up. Owen finally stood, his voice low. I think I've heard enough. He left without another word. I didn't shout or cry. I just stood there, calm and certain. For years, they had controlled every moment, every story. But that night, the truth spoke for itself. They couldn't twist it or deny it. And for the first time, I saw them exactly as they were, small, selfish, and afraid. The weeks after that dinner felt strangely calm. No one called, no one texted. For the first time in years, my phone stayed silent. I didn't chase them or wonder what they were saying about me. I knew the truth was already doing its work. When something fake breaks, it doesn't explode, it just quietly falls apart. Owen came to the bakery a few days later. He looked tired but different, lighter somehow. He ordered coffee and sat down across from me. For a moment, we just stared at each other before he said, I moved out. His voice was quiet, but steady. I filed for divorce. I didn't ask why. He didn't need to explain. We both knew. Brooke's world had been built on pretending, and that night, I'd taken the mask away. Rumors started spreading fast. In their neighborhood, people talked. One of Mom's old friends stopped by the bakery one morning, pretending to buy muffins. She leaned in and whispered, Is it true what Owen said in court? I didn't respond, but I saw the curiosity in her eyes, the kind people have when the perfect family next door starts to crumble. Owen's divorce filing mentioned emotional manipulation and financial pressure from in-laws. It was written in black and white, and soon everyone knew. My parents' reputation, the one they had worked so hard to polish, began to crack. Friends stopped visiting. Invitations dried up. My father, who once loved being the center of attention, stopped attending community events. My mother avoided the grocery store, afraid of whispers. Brooke moved back in with them a few weeks later. She tried to hide it, but people noticed. Their big house suddenly looked smaller without the glow of approval they once had. I heard they sold their second car, then the boat, then canceled their country club membership. Every choice they made to appear important had come full circle. Meanwhile, I kept working. The bakery slowly became busier than ever. People liked the warmth of the place, the smell of fresh bread, the kindness that came from genuine care, not show. I hired a part-time helper, then another. Jack started helping after school, greeting customers and sneaking chocolate chips when he thought I wasn't watching. Business wasn't just good, it was honest. And that made all the difference. Sometimes customers would mention my family, not realizing the story they were talking about was mine. That's so sad about the Winters, someone would say. I'd smile politely, hand them their order, and move on. There was no anger left in me, only distance. Late one evening, as I closed up the shop, I thought about how different everything had become. My parents still had their house, but not the attention they craved. Brooke still had her designer clothes, but no husband to impress. They'd lost what they valued most, image. I'd lost their approval long ago, but I'd gained something stronger. The life I had now wasn't perfect or glamorous. It was simple, early mornings, flour on my hands, my son laughing in the back room. Every pie, every loaf, every smile from a stranger reminded me that peace doesn't come from being admired. It comes from being true. I didn't need revenge. Their own actions had done enough. All I needed was what I already had, a life built on real love, not performance. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I saw her. My mother stood outside the bakery window, holding a small bag of toys and an envelope in her hand. She looked older than I remembered, her hair neater, but her face lined with worry. For a moment, I just watched her through the glass. She didn't knock right away. She just stood there, staring inside as if she wasn't sure she belonged. Jack was at the counter, humming while he decorated sugar cookies. The sight of him, happy and healthy, filled the room with warmth. I thought about all the nights I'd cried beside his hospital bed, all the times I'd begged for help that never came. Now here she was, arriving too late with gifts that meant nothing. After a few seconds, she finally raised her hand and knocked softly. Our eyes met. She gave a small, uncertain smile, then held up the envelope like it explained everything. I didn't move. My hand rested on the counter, calm and steady. Then I walked over to the door and turned the sign from open to closed. She hesitated, confused, then slowly lowered her hand. I saw her mouth form the word please, but I didn't open the door. I just stood there, quiet. There were no tears, no anger, only stillness. Through the glass, she looked smaller somehow, like the image she had built all her life had faded. After a moment, she turned and walked away. I locked the door and went back to Jack. He looked up, smiling, a smudge of frosting on his cheek. I brushed it away and laughed softly. For the first time in a long while, my heart felt light. They had chosen money over love. I had chosen love, and I finally felt free. Do you think cutting them off was the only way to finally find peace, or did I go too far? Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell.